Hi guys, this is your lecture for November 4th. We're covering pages 155 to 157. So in America, there was something called sectional differences. And basically what this is referring to is the fact that different sections of the United States viewed themselves as separate from other sections, and they wanted to put their interests first. So these differences are going to cause a lot of strife within the United States, and it's something that the presidential administrations at the time are really going to have to deal with. So even though John Marshall claimed that Monroe's administration was not darkened by a single cloud, and of course we know that Monroe's administration was named the era of good feelings, it did give birth to some feelings that were not so good. So what issues directly affected sectionalism? Well, there are several issues. There's land policy, westward expansion, Bank of the United States, the tariff issue, slavery. All of these issues were viewed differently by different sections of the United States. So let's pause and look at each one individually. So land policy and westward expansion we can sort of look at as one. And it's easy to see that most Westerners promoted easy land policies and internal improvements at the federal expense because they were hoping to increase their profits and make life in the rugged West somewhat easier. However, Southerners, for instance, were split on land policy and internal improvements. There were those who wished to obtain their own land in the West, and they supported expansion. However, there were others who did not like the idea of the westward expansion, and these people in the South would have been established and influential plantation owners who feared that westward expansion in the South would create competition for them, and so they were very hesitant to support expansion. And then the northeastern industrialists opposed easy land policies for a couple of reasons. Firstly, they saw the federal domain in the West as a national asset which should be sold only at prices high enough to make a profit for the federal government, and they feared that cheap land in the West would drain off the supply of industrial workers in the Northeast. Furthermore, they did not want to pay taxes to promote internal improvements in the West because they were convinced that their best interests lay in industrial expansion. So just with that idea of land policy and westward expansion, you can see that the North has a different view, the South has a different view, the West has a different view, and they're all going to clash with one another. And so this causes strife within the country. Another issue was the Bank of the United States. So the Northeastern industrialists loved the bank. They wanted to continue supporting it. But the West did not like the bank because they blamed it for the Panic of 1819. And they also did not like the fact that the Northeastern financiers were profited by the banking policies. And the South was pretty much indifferent to the bank issue. Okay, so let's talk about the tariff issue. So the tariff issue, the industrial Northeast stood in favor of high protective tariff. The South had been willing for some years to compromise on the tariff issue, but the invention of the cotton gin had made the Southern economy almost completely dependent on the exportation of cotton, which would make a tariff something that would hurt them. So they stood against high tariffs. So originally the South was okay with tariffs, but then when the tariffs started hurting them, they didn't like tariffs anymore. And then the West tended to be divided on the tariff issue. So some people in the West supported the tariff, and some people in the West did not support the tariff. And then finally, slavery was a huge issue that created the greatest conflict, and this has to do, of course, with the fact that there were large anti-slavery forces that were in the North, but the South was more dependent on slave labor than ever, and so there was that huge conflict between the North and the South. And often the West tended to side with the South because many Westerners had originally come from slave states. But we can see that that last issue is the one that becomes part of a major war, civil war. Okay, so the Missouri Compromise comes into play with all of these sectional conflicts within the United States, and it has to do with the Missouri Territory. So you can tell that there's going to be a lot of issues that come to play within the Missouri Territory that have to do with the different issues that we talked about, but the most important one was the issue of slavery. So I want you to pause this video and go to Edpuzzle and watch your Edpuzzle about the Missouri Compromise so you can learn a little more. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about sectionalism, but with regards to party politics. And so I have another Edpuzzle for you. It's called The American Presidential Election of 1824. So please pause this video and take a look at that. Okay, so politics is definitely going to be influenced by sectionalism. Certain people are going to support certain candidates because those candidates have views that are going to support their section of the United States. And then we have the very famous Favorite Sons election of 1824, which was highly controversial. And as a result of the Favorite Sons election, the Republican Party split into two groups. That would be the National Republicans, and these are the Adams-Clay supporters, and they supported a policy of nationalism. And then we have the Democratic Republicans, which eventually just became known as the Democrats, and they support Jackson, and they take up the Jeffersonian ideas of states' rights. Now, it's important to recognize that this idea of nationalism versus states' rights, or we could say it in a different way of the central government versus the state governments, is an issue that's going to come up again and again until the Civil War, because there is this conflict of which has more power. Do the states have more power, or does the state have to submit to the central government? And people have different points of view on this, which is why there's different parties about it. Okay, so John Quincy Adams is elected president as a result of the Favorite Sons election, and he really is one of the best qualified presidents ever. He conducted the office with dignity. He set high standards for himself and for those around him. He was dedicated to duty. He refused to give positions either as a reward for friends or to punish enemies with his power. So he was a very honorable president. He was not super popular at times, but he was actually a very good president. And he promoted nationalism. And nationalism, of course, is this idea of looking at the nation as a whole and enjoying it as a whole, having policies that promote it as a whole. The tariff controversy really caused bitter feelings of sectionalism to explode. So during the tariff controversy, what started the tariff controversy was that Congress had adopted the protective tariff of 1816. And at the time, national spirit had been so strong that all of the sections of the United States had agreed to the tariff. But by 1824, when Congress started adopting a higher tariff, which, remember, a tariff is essentially a tax, and it's going to be a tax on goods that are imported or exported, and depending on that, it can hurt who's ever importing or exporting the tariffs, as far as they don't make as much money. But when Congress adopted higher tariffs in 1824, that's when there was a huge blow up about the tariffs, and there was a giant controversy. Because when they adopted a higher tariff, Congress was actually protecting Northeastern manufacturing, and cries of protest came from Southern planters and New England shippers. And by the late 1820s, manufacturing had surpassed shipping as New England's chief activity, and so the North called for even higher tariffs. And the South is going to stand strongly against these protective tariffs because the success of her entire economy is based upon exportation of cotton. So the tariffs helped the Northeast, but the tariffs did not help the South. In fact, the South lost money. So there's going to be there's huge controversy and bitter feelings over the tariff. Okay, so it's your turn. I want you to please open up your books, page 157, and complete the section review there. Turn it in via Dropbox. Thank you.